Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. My name is Carson Hunter. I live in Atlanta, Georgia, and work for Metadata Technology North America as a software developer. So a little about me, I work on our backend system. So I build and consume APIs. I do a little bit with data quality and data management. Also, since we're a small team, I work on our documentation and our marketing efforts. And in the past year, I've really kind of taken a deep dive into Postman documentation. Earlier in March and April, when coronavirus was just starting and we started to load coronavirus data into our API, I put together a collection and submitted it to the Postman API Resource Center, and it got a great reaction, and it actually led to my team and I being able to work with some of the Postman team on that and some of the future API Resource Centers, which turned into public workspaces. And so along the way, I learned some tips and tricks that helped me to make pretty good collections very consistently. And I wanted to share some of those strategies so that you can hopefully upgrade some of your collections as well. So who benefits from putting all this time into good documentation? And when I say documentation, I mean both the HTML page that you get when you publish a collection and the collection itself, because when people click that Run in Postman button and they're interacting with your collection that you've put together, they're going to need some guidance there as well. So first of all, your users, that's who you've written your API for. It might be within your company, it might be the general public, but these are the people you really want to tailor your experience to and give them a good experience. Number two, you might not think about it, but whenever you make something public, whether it's an API, a template, you put it in a public workspace, people can search for it. And when they stumble upon it, they're probably not going to have the background on your company that someone who's going to you directly might have. So you want to make sure you provide maybe more detail than you normally would so you can retain these people and they're going to want and love to use your product and not kind of scatter off to other APIs that have better documentation. Number three, the Postman resource centers and public workspaces. I'll get into this a little later, but these are curated lists of APIs that are around a specific topic. And so when people are coming and they're looking to build maybe a coronavirus dashboard, they are scanning through these lists. And when you contribute to these, they broaden the scope of data that's available and make them really a go-to resource on the internet for people to find data and build dashboards that we can all benefit from. And number four is your future self. I am very guilty of this, not saying anyone else would ever do this, but sometimes I'll put together a Postman collection for a project I'm doing. It's going great. I'm adding stuff left and right. I'll remember this forever. And then I get pulled off to a different project, work on that for a few months. And when I come back, I'm not really sure what I was thinking. I didn't document anything. And so obviously you don't need to document these to the extent that you would something that's for the general public, but implementing a few of these strategies can really help save you some time when you do come back to these projects. So going in a little further to these Postman public workspaces and API resource centers, I'll use these kind of interchangeably. At first, these resource centers were based kind of in GitHub, and now they're transitioning more into public workspaces because it's really a great fit for curating different collections from different people. But there's a few ways you can get involved if you're interested in doing something like this. And it's a great way to kind of practice your Postman skills. So number one is to submit your own API. This is what I did with our Rich Data Services API. I put together a collection that was more of a curated kind of story rather than our generic documentation that lists every request and every parameter. I really tried to focus in on people that were getting this specific data, what they would want to see, and tell some stories around that to make it easier for them to really just dive in and hit the ground running. But if you don't have an API that's yours and you want to submit, you can actually document someone else's API, whether it's something you find on the internet that's not currently included in one of these lists and you think it'd make a great addition. Maybe these companies don't know that they should be creating a Postman collection. You can kind of take the initiative and submit that yourself. Get familiar with the API, write a little about it, and look for the contribution guidelines on these public workspaces. Still kind of ironing out the process for this because previously it was all based in GitHub issues, but there's probably a process where you'll, make a pull request with your collection in a folder and it can get merged in. And, kind of like open source, it's a great way to contribute to the community without being super technical and writing a lot of code. And the third way is to create a utility. This is where if you find some data that's kind of floating around on the internet that doesn't have an API associated with it, there's actually a way you can contribute this as well. And I'll get into that a little later. So after I created a couple collections that went into these resource centers and public workspaces, I ended up creating something I call the submission template. This is a collection about creating collections, kind of meta, but it just goes through each level. So at the collection level, at the request level, what you should have to make it easy for people to understand what you're doing. So you can go through and use it, have it pulled up and use it kind of as a checklist as you're writing your documentation, or you could fork it and, replace everything I've written with other things as you go. And just, that's a good guide for, making something that's very thorough. I've included a screenshot here of where you can find this. It's on our MTNA public profile, and you can just click through that and take a look. So what makes something well documented? I'll dive into these each a little deeper, but just for starters, providing some context about what the API is about, crafting stories to kind of draw users in, help to teach them, providing example responses is huge when you're a developer, creating visualizations, I think this is the most exciting part, and then 5, these utility requests. So when you're providing collection level context, there's a few subjects you'll want to cover so that when people are shopping, around for an API to use in their dashboard, they can figure out if it's the right fit for them. So first off, the creator info. If you're the creator of this API, give some information on where people can contact you. If you have a GitHub, talk about if you're a nonprofit, if you're a private company, just give some background so people know the creator of this API. And then if you're documenting someone else's API, it might also be good to include your contact information as well. So if people want to collaborate with you, they can reach out and you guys can kind of work together. And then the tech specs. This is really if you are working with an API that has a API key, it's good to note that. If the API is still in development, good to note that. Just anything you can get your hands on about the responsiveness, any throttling that it has, those are good things to know. And then provenance, where does this data come from? If you can provide a link to the original data, that's really great to have. If there's somewhere that users can look through the data before they query it over an API, that can sometimes be useful. And then if there's been any changes, any transformations to the data, it's good to note those so people can know if it's original, how it's been cleaned or transformed. Good to document that as well. And then finally, resources. If you are creating a collection for an API, you're probably one of the top 5% of people who know this API in and out of all the people that are going to use it. So excuse me, use it as kind of a brain dump to put everything you've learned, any related documentation, if there's an open API spec related to it, if there are any sample apps or tutorials, just throw them in there so people can have the background that you did and really get off on the right foot. So number 2, user stories. This is a great way to kind of provide more context for the specific data that people are getting from your API. So when I set out to document our coronavirus API, I wanted to pull out some specific queries that I thought might be interesting to people and kind of talk about why I set up the request the way I did. So I went through, talked about each parameter, why I chose this parameter and this value, and how people could edit both if they wanted a different outcome. I think this is a great way to kind of teach your users the right way to use your API and to guide them, especially if your API is more complex. It's a great teaching moment. Number 3, example responses. So if you're a developer, you know that having an example of how the data is going to come back is an invaluable resource for any API that you're getting started with. So first of all, it builds confidence that at least at one point, this API returned something and it worked. So it's a great start for knowing that you can use this API with confidence. Number 2, you can highlight multiple responses. So in this GIF, I'm showing you how you can alternate between getting, record level data and data that you might want to use that's already formatted for AM charts in our API. And this is a lot easier to show with the multiple response options in Postman's documentation than it is, explaining it in a few paragraphs. It's great to actually see it. And then finally, my colleague, Andrew DiCarlo, who's also presenting at the Postman conference and has a great presentation that you should watch, he's created this MTNA Newman utility, so we found out that adding these examples can be kind of timely. Like it can take a little time to go through, especially if you have a lot of requests. So with his utility, you export your collection JSON, run it through, and it runs each of your requests and saves it as an example. And you can, re-upload your collection and it's already there for you. So that's open source. It's on our GitHub. I'll try and drop a link in the chat at the end. Number 4, visualizations. This is absolutely my favorite part of Postman documentation. I won't go too far into why or how to build great visualizations. I'm sure there's other talks that do a great job of that. But just when you're, writing documentation and you have taken the time to put these visualizations in your collection, right now at the time of recording, they don't show up anywhere in the HTML documentation page. So I like to include, a picture or a GIF if the graph is interactive, showing, what this visualization looks like, and include a note of how people can access that visualization, how they can use it if they're not really familiar with the Postman platform, just instruct them how to get there. And then it also gives users kind of a head start in using your API. So when you've taken the time to write some code, some basically front-end code that interacts with your backend API, this is basically like a mini app that users can kind of riff on and just really get a running start into integrating it into their own platform. Number 5, utility requests. I'd mentioned this a couple times earlier, but this is for when you find data on the internet, but you can't really find it in an API. So an example of this, I was looking around and found this TSA coronavirus data that compared 2019 and 2020 numbers of people that have gone through TSA security and how that's changed due to coronavirus. But I could not find it anywhere in an API, and I thought I might like to use it. So I used Cheerio.js and the Postman API to scrape the HTML table and return it in JSON format. Not an original idea by me, but I think it's a really clever way to really broaden the horizon and scope of data that's available in these API resource centers and public workspaces, and maybe just in a project that you're doing yourself. It's a really nice way to flex your JavaScript muscles. And that's all I have. So I've included a few links. I'll try and drop them in the chat here in a second. But I really love looking through people's Postman collections. So if you ever need another set of eyes, feel free to drop me a note in my email, and I'd be happy to look over it for you. And that's all I have. I'll see you on the Postman community. Thanks.